Okay, we're going to be talking about genetics, and specifically this time Gregor Mendel, who is known as the father of genetics. But before we get started, there's some terms you need to know. Trait, any characteristic that is passed from parent to child. Heredity is the passing of the traits from parents to offspring. And genetics is a study of heredity, so studying the passing of traits from generation to generation to generation. Gregor Mendel is the father of genetics. He is the first person to accurately come up with information about genetics. He discovered the basic laws of heredity. There were people before him that studied genetics, but some of their information they claimed to know was not very accurate. For example, they would say that if someone hung from, let's say, a bar long enough, they would stretch their body out, they would become taller. That is not the case. Your height is determined by your genes. Seeing as he was a monk, he had a lot of time on his hands. He was probably rather bored, and so what he decided to work with was plants. Pea plants in particular. He noticed that pea plants were easy to breed, they reproduced fast, and they produced lots of offspring. So he pretty much forced peas to have sex with each other. Yes, pea plants have sex. In fact, all plants reproduce sexually. And what he started out with was a pure strain of pea plants. He looked at 7 or 8 different characteristics, and you're going to get a handout that shows them, and it's also in this PowerPoint. So he started out with pure plants. So you had pure tall versus pure short, pure round versus pure wrinkled, yellow, green. What that means is that if you had a pure tall plant, it can only make more tall plants. If you have a pure short plant, it can only produce short plants. If you have a yellow plant, it's only going to produce more yellow plants. They were pure. So what he did, he crossed these pure strains kind of with a contrasting trait. So he took tall, and he crossed them with short. He took the round, crossed with the wrinkled, and I'm going to abbreviate, and he took the yellow and crossed it with the green. And he did that with all 7 to 8 characteristics. He took the pure of one trait with the pure of the opposite trait. He did this over and over. He got thousands of information because he did this for about 8 years. Tons and tons of information. Some things you need to know about peas. When pollen fertilizes an egg, a seed for the new plant is formed. We're producing baby seeds. Plants do reproduce sexually. So yes, like I just mentioned, plants have sex. They have 2 distinct gametes. There's the male gamete known as the pollen, which carries the sperm, and then the female gamete, which is the egg, so just like humans. With pea plants will tend to self-pollinate as opposed to cross-pollinate. What that means is if the plant is self-pollinating, that one plant has both the male pollen and the female egg in one plant. With cross-pollination, a lot of times what has to happen is the pollen literally has to go across an area and land on a new plant. You should already know that fertilization is the uniting of the male and female gametes, in other words, the sperm plus the egg. The pollen plus the egg. And the word cross. That is the combining gametes from parents with different traits. So, and I may say the mom was crossed with the dad, or the tall plant was crossed with the short plant, the yellow plant was crossed with the green plant, the round seed plant was crossed with the wrinkled seed plant. Okay, so a cross, and there's literally, when you write it, an X, which means cross. So again, combining gametes, combining eggs and sperm from parents with different traits. Here's just those definitions again. Pollen, the sperm. Ovary contains the eggs. There's self-fertilization, which is the same as self-pollination. Cross-fertilization is the same as cross-pollination. So with Mendel, again, with his peas, many traits appear to have two different forms. The fancy word for that, you know, in science, we have to be technical, we have to be difficult about these things. We can't just call them forms. They're alleles. So there was the tall allele and the short allele. This is for height. For shape, you had the round allele and the wrinkled allele. For color, you had the yellow allele and the green allele. And there's more. If you want to know an example of a human trait, there's just two alleles or two forms. You have tongue rollers versus non-tongue rollers, attached earlobes versus unattached earlobes, widow's peak versus no widow's peak. And we're going to talk about more of that in class. Again, he crossed pure strains, and what he actually did, he cut off the male part of the plant. The male part of the flower, he literally cut it off. Yes, think about it. Think about it. He then took a little tiny paintbrush and took the pollen off of that male part. So the pollen is now sitting on the paintbrush, kind of like in the picture. He then took the pollen that's sitting on the paintbrush and brushed it onto the female part. Right there, he's making the plants have sex. He kept track of which one he pollinated, of where the pollen went from and where it went to, so he knew who the mom was, he knew who the dad was, and then he looked at the baby seeds that were produced. He could not have pollen flying around his greenhouse randomly. He wouldn't know who the father was, and then he would have no way to explain his results. You always have to have controlled experiments. Let's go ahead and look at some of his results. So we'll just talk about height in this picture here. Mendel crossed pure tall with pure short, and what he found is that his next generation, those babies that were produced, they were all tall. Okay? He called this first generation his P generation. He called this generation his F1 generation. Then what he decided to do is take these talls here, which I will call F1 talls, and he crossed them with another F1 tall. And what he got were some plants that were tall and some that were short. So his P generation, his original parents, think of those as being your grandparents. The F1 tall, think of them as your parents. And This generation here, which he called F2, this would be like you. Okay, so one more time. He took a pure tall with a pure short. He got 100% tall plants, as you'd see in this picture here. All of them were tall. He then took tall from that same generation, mixed it with another tall from that same generation, because that's all there were. There were only tall plants. So he took a tall with a tall, and this next time he got tall, and now he got his short plant back. Originally, when he mixed the tall with the short, he thought he was going to get medium height plants. He was wrong. He got 100% tall. And then that's where it led him to, well, let's see what happens. I have all these tall plants. I thought they were going to be medium. He took the tall and the tall, so it's like your mom and your dad making your generation, which he called the F2. And now he got, and it was always 75% tall and 25% short. It didn't matter what trait he looked at, whether it was the roundness, whether it was height, whether it was yellow versus green. He always got the same figures. So again, think of this as your grandparents, your parents, and then your generation. The F actually stands for a Latin word for, I think it's Latin or Greek word for child. So he had those parents, his first set of children, his second set of children. And we're going to talk more about that. I want to show you something else. So what he actually had, he had his pure talls with his pure shorts. P1 produced F1. They were 100% tall. He took the F1 talls, crossed the F1 talls. He got his F2 generation. He had his tall, and his short. Okay. The last slide for this, last two slides, here's just a picture of his peas, and here's just a listing of the characteristics for the peas. Seed shape, seed color, pod shape. I'm going to give you another handout that has this information on it.